Hello and welcome. You are watching Middle East Matters live here on France 24. I'm Nadia Massih. In this week's programme, we discuss Iraq's once thriving Jewish community, now all but consigned to the history books. During the First World War, about a third of the population of Baghdad was Jewish, but in the 1940s, everything changed. Anti-Semitic attacks, pogroms, Jewish men publicly hung. This in the context of anti-Semitism in Europe, Nazism, and the establishment of Israel in 1948. Well, we will in a moment look more closely at Iraq's Jewish history and what efforts there are to preserve what remains. But first, France 24's Shirley Sitbon is with me here in the studio. Hi, Shirley.
Hello.
Look, you've been looking at a trial that is happening here in Paris at the moment. It's a case brought by the descendants of Iraqi Jews against the French government. Now, they argue France has been using their home in Baghdad and as an embassy for 50 years, and they say actually France hasn't been paying them the proper amount of rent. It's a rather complicated story. Just explain to us what it's all about.
Yes, and actually France agrees on this part. They are living in their home in Baghdad, and they are not paying them any rent. But France says it has reasons to do so. So let's start by looking at the images of the French embassy in Baghdad. The images have been shown. You can see them here. There's a French flag. It's written on the poster, "This is the French embassy in Baghdad." When there are holiday greetings, this is what you see. This home, this house, but in fact, this home is a looted home. It was taken. Well, there was a family who used to live there and who still officially owns the house. And you can see these images of the time, the days when this house was built, like frozen in time, the 1930s, 1940s. That's when the family built and lived there, but then they had to flee, like 135,000 other Iraqis who had to flee. Why? Because there was growing anti-Semitism, there was violence, persecution, and the Farhud. You can see on these images the family who had to leave, the Lawi family, two brothers, Ezra and Kaduri, and these are the images of the embassy today. We'll go back to that. Let's look at the images. There are just two pictures, not many images of the attack of the Farhud pogroms carried out in June 1941. This image was taken before the Farhud. It's an anti-Semitic riot. At the time, Nazi Germany had an influence in Iraq. They spread Nazi propaganda, anti-Semitic propaganda. And this image we're seeing now is after the Farhud. This is a mass grave. 179 Jews were killed in those attacks, just 2 days. And then authorities, years later, Israel was created. Some people had already fled Iraq. In 1948, when Israel was created, Iraq said to the Jewish people, there was growing discrimination, and said, you have a year to leave our country, but you'll no longer be Iraqis, and you'll leave your belongings behind. And after that, Iraq passed another law saying that all the belongings of the people who left were now state belongings, do not belong to those families, and they can never return. But the Lawi family, it still had family in Iraq living in the house, so the house was still theirs. That's why they were able to rent the house to France for the embassy, the ideal tenant for them, because they believed they would pay rent, the house would be preserved. But in fact, after a decade, France stopped paying rent because the Ba'ath Party came to power. And at that time, Saddam Hussein, the officials in Iraq, told France, you don't have to pay rent to this family. It's ours now. All of these belongings of Jews no longer belong to the Jews. And so France accepted to pay just 10% of its rent and no longer pay the family. And that's why 50 years later, this has been taken to court. Of course, the family brought this up with France many times, but there was no response. So now they're taking it to court.
Okay, so this is a court case happening here in France, Shirley. And look, the French Foreign Ministry says to the family, well, the argument that they're going to make in court is you shouldn't be accusing us of a problem here. Actually, this trial should be taking place in Iraq.
Yes, that's what they're arguing. And actually, there was no lawyer for the foreign ministry in court last week. It was the advisor of the court who said, well, this house is in Iraq. This is Iraqi law. It doesn't apply. I mean, he advised the court to say it's not responsible for this case and that this should be argued in Iraq. And he said it's not impossible that an Iraqi court will take this and give a decision on this matter. Now, what was the reaction of the family and its lawyer when this happened? It's several lawyers. Well, that's just preposterous, ridiculous, to put it mildly. The lawyer explained that the family can't even go to Iraq. It's illegal for Jews to go there. They cannot do it. It would be anyway too dangerous, even if it was possible. And no lawyer they contacted, which were suggested by the French embassy and the French foreign office, accepted to take this case. So we can listen to what, and actually now it's getting momentum. And the Figaro newspaper said, was quoting the lawyer of the family, saying that stealing Jewish property is now made possible and done with a complacency, la complaisance. It's done with the green light of the French Foreign Office. That's what his quote. Now let's listen to the grandson of Ezra Laoui, who talked to us about what he thought of this situation. His name is Philip Kazam.
France is using an Iraqi law passed specifically to punish Jews to justify using a house owned by Jews without paying the owners. There's shameless depravity here. This is the government position. It doesn't feel shame and humiliation. A G7 nation that stands for human rights, that uses liberté, égalité, fraternité as a national motto. This is what we call in English gaslighting, deliberately twisting reality to create an insane reality. That's exactly what the French government is trying to do here. It does not make any sense.
So, of course, the Laoui and the Kazam family will be following this next week when the court decides whether it's competent to handle this case. Everyone's waiting. It's also watched by the descendants of many Iraqi Jews. And also, that at the time, from the 30s to the 70s, 800,000 Jews had to flee and leave Arab countries. And many of them, their descendants, are looking at the decision next week.
All right. Thank you very much, Shirley Sitbon, for us there. And as I said a bit earlier on, we are now going to zoom out and look at Iraq's rich Jewish history more broadly. And for that, I'm pleased to welcome to the programme Dr. Omar Mohammad. He's a professor of Middle East history at Sciences Po University here in Paris. Hello to you and thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me. And it's really important that we are talking about this topic, one of the forgotten topics of Iraq, but glad it's back to the surface.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased that we're inviting you on to talk about it then. You're something of an expert on the Jewish history of Iraq. And I mentioned that statistic earlier on, that a third of the population of Baghdad during the First World War was Jewish, and not something that I don't think many people knew. I certainly didn't know that until I looked into this story. So just paint a picture for us, first of all. What did that Jewish community look like at that time when it was flourishing? What kind of sectors did people work in? How integrated were they with the Arab Muslim population of the city?
Well, to start with, the Jewish community in Iraq is one of the most ancient communities in the country. Iraq is a very important space for Judaism. The Babylonian diaspora is one of the most important in the region. Jewish communities across Iraq, as you mentioned in Baghdad, they consisted of over 40% of the population of Baghdad. They contributed to music, daily life, culture, economy, politics. Iraq had its first ever appointed Jewish Minister of Finance. Many other personalities, in fact, created or established the Iraqi trade with India. We still have, until now, the Sassoon family in Calcutta in India, thanks to the Iraqi Jewish family. Others were in schools. They established, in fact, the earliest systematic schools were established by Rima Khadduri and by Khadduri family in Baghdad, in Mosul. We had a Jewish community in southern Iraq, in Basra as well. We also had probably people never heard of the existence of the Jewish community in a city that is often known just when we talk about the rise of terrorism in Iraq, which is the city of Fallujah. It still has one of the oldest synagogues in Iraq. We have in Anbar, there was ancient Jewish community. Unfortunately, all of that almost all of a sudden disappeared from the country after the rise of anti-Semitism, the Farhud, the pogroms, and the systematic attacks against the Jewish community in Iraq.
Right,
Most
that was
of
the
them
1940s, wasn't it? That was the 1940s when things
Yes.
began to change in Iraq. So just give us as a sense, a picture of what was happening in the 1940s, the geopolitical context and the Iraqi context.
Well, since the rise of Nazism in Germany, the Iraqi government at that time began establishing connections with the Nazis, and the Nazis have had influence over the way Iraqi government at that time. The king himself had interactions with Hitler. It started growing the kind of sense of the Jew hater and the anti-Semitism. It was also through the Germans who worked in Iraq. There were many attempts before even the pogrom itself took place against the Jews. Many of the senior members of the Jewish community of Iraq whom I met with and recorded their testimonies explained that the anti-Semitism that they experienced predated the creation of Israel. But then when the creation of Israel happened and the government of Iraq deprived and denounced and canceled the citizenship and nationality of all Iraqi Jews, it led to a much more systematic, I would say, systematic attack against the Iraqi Jews, which led them to definitely flee the country.
Okay, let's move on then to today, 2026. Do we know if there are any Jews who still live in Iraq? What remains of the community?
Well, to be honest, it's a very sad reality, and it's often very sad to talk about numbers when it comes to Iraqi Jews. As the number suggests here, only in Baghdad there were over 139,000 in Baghdad. We have probably now less than 3 to 4 Iraqi Jews who are very old. There is no one left of the Iraqi Jewish community of Iraq, unfortunately, and that is due to all that systematic deportation that happened. This is something that must be also discussed in light of there were many attempts, many requests of Iraqi Jews who wanted to reclaim their Iraqi nationality, but there is no law in Iraq can grant or cancel the revocation of the Iraqi citizenship again. There were many attempts to also revive the Iraqi Jewish heritage in Iraq, but it always is faced with political difficulties, political instability in the country, which makes it really very difficult to even discuss this topic in real life.
And look, if I can just ask you a personal question, you're from Mosul, that's a city in Iraq, you know, associated really tragically now with the Islamic State group. In fact, you used to publish anonymously about what was happening in Mosul at the time under this pseudonym, the Mosul Eye. Today, though, as you've been talking about today, one of your big focuses is on the Jewish heritage of Mosul. You're not of Jewish descent yourself. Can I just ask why this is particularly important for you?
Well, I mean, I don't have to be Jewish to care about the Jewish heritage. In fact, it is very important to, when we discuss diversity, we also discuss inclusion. In Iraq, we have diversity. It's very beautiful, but diversity without inclusion is not complete. Iraq's Jewish history and heritage is integral to the Iraqi identity, without which we cannot create a collective narrative of coexistence and tolerance. And it's very important that the coming generations of Iraq will know about the Jewish heritage. I did not know about the Jewish history and heritage. I did not even know that there were Jews in Iraq until I found out on my own many years later. It is very important also to establish, especially in a country like Iraq, that experienced the devastation of radicalization and terrorism, to this time tolerate each other and to accept the existence of the other. We have communities that represent Christianity, very ancient. We have Muslims, we have Sabians, Mendais, we have the Yazidis who experienced the terrifying genocide by ISIS, by Daesh. I think it's time that we bring every element of our society together. And this is why we, back in 2021, through 2023, launched the project to revive the Jewish heritage of Mosul, where we documented the testimonies of the living members of that community, collected archives, documentation, in order to bring back a thriving society and community where harmony and tolerance are the identity of this community.
Dr. Omar Mohammad, there's so much more I'd like to ask you about the Jewish community of Iraq, but unfortunately we are out of time. I appreciate you, though, speaking to us today here on Middle East Matters. Thank you very much.